Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We're all about getting past those surface level explanations,
Mhm.
really digging deep into the core ideas that have shaped things and honestly continue to shape things, and we try to do it without wasting your time. Today we're tackling a topic that I think resonates with pretty much everyone, building wealth.
And we're not talking about those flash in the pan strategies or the investment flavor of the month, right? We're going way deeper.
Yeah.
We're going to explore some seriously enduring wisdom on building wealth that comes from As Cinco Leis do Oro, Sabedoria de Babylonia. It basically takes the principles from George S. Glason's classic, The Richest Man in Babylon, and puts them into a really engaging narrative. You might already be familiar with that one.
Definitely a classic. So, in our source material, the wisdom is passed down through a character named Calibab, who shares the insights of Arkad, who was known as the richest man in Babylon. And the whole thing is framed around the story of Arkad's son, Numasir, and what are called the five laws of gold. Pretty straightforward, right?
I
But it's powerful stuff. So, we're going to break down these five laws and really see how they apply to, well, your financial life today in the 21st century. I
Hmm.
mean, think about it. Have you ever stopped and really considered what those fundamental, those almost timeless rules are for achieving lasting financial success?
It's a question that I think deserves a lot more attention than it gets, especially with how much of the financial news we're bombarded with every day focuses on like what to do right now, today, and what's going to happen tomorrow.
It's all very short term.
Yeah, very reactive. But Calabab starts things off by presenting a scenario to his listeners that really gets you thinking.
Okay, so what's the scenario?
He asks them to imagine they have a choice. A bag absolutely overflowing with gold, or a clay tablet, the kind they used back then, that's inscribed with words of wisdom. Which would you choose?
That's an interesting question.
And almost without hesitation, everyone shouts, the gold, the gold.
It's such a human response, isn't it? To gravitate towards that immediate, tangible wealth.
It is. That instant gratification is hard to resist, for sure. But Calabob's response, he just kind of smiles knowingly, and you can tell there's a deeper meaning there. He's hinting at this common misconception, this idea that wealth is just about having a lot of stuff.
It's more about understanding how to build it.
Exactly. And, more importantly, how to keep it. And what he's subtly saying is that the wisdom, in the long run, that's way more valuable than a bag of gold that you could easily squander.
Right, right. And that leads us into how Arkad, the richest man in Babylon, deals with his own son, Nomasir. He doesn't just hand over his fortune.
Not at all. Instead, he gives Nomasir two things. A bag of gold, sure, but also this clay tablet, and this tablet is inscribed with the five laws of gold. But there's a catch.
Okay, there's always a catch. What is it?
Well, Arcot tells Nomasir that he has 10 years. 10 years to go out into the world, build his own wealth, and just as importantly, earn respect. He has to prove himself, not just coast on his father's name.
So he's setting him a challenge.
A challenge, exactly. And you can see Arcad's wisdom here. He understands that real lasting success doesn't come from just inheriting money. It comes from actually knowing how to use it, how to make it grow. It's applied knowledge, not just inherited resources.
So Nomasir sets off to Nineveh with his bag of gold and his tablet, ready to make his fortune. But let's be honest, his first attempts at managing this wealth, they don't exactly go as planned, do they?
They do not. He stumbles a few times, and there are two stories in particular that really highlight these early missteps.
Okay, so let's hear about the first one. What happens?
Well, the first big setback for Nomasir involves, of all things, a horse race.
Mm.
He gets involved with this group of, well, they come across as friendly, but really they're looking to take advantage of him. They present him with what seems like a can't-miss opportunity.
I'm already sensing this is not going to end well.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
So they show him this magnificent white horse, truly a beautiful creature, and they tell him it's going to beat the reigning champion, a horse that has supposedly never lost a race.
Sounds like a classic setup.
It does, doesn't it? And Nomasir, being a bit naive and, maybe blinded by the potential for a quick win, ends up betting a huge chunk of his gold.
I bet I know what happens next.
Well, you can probably guess.
Mm.
The white horse, despite all the hype, loses. And Nomasir loses a significant portion of his wealth in the process.
Ouch. That's a tough lesson to learn.
It is. And the lesson he takes away from this experience is pretty harsh. He realizes that he was basically used as a pawn in a scheme orchestrated by these so-called friends who preyed on his lack of experience. It's a wake-up call to the fact that you need to be cautious, you need to really look out for yourself, and especially be skeptical of anything that seems too good to be true.
So the importance of due diligence.
Absolutely. Vetting the situation, understanding the people you're dealing with, and not just taking things at face value. And unfortunately, this element of deception, it's still so relevant today, isn't it?
Sadly, yes.
People are still falling for schemes, whether it's in finance or other areas of life.
So Nomasir loses a big chunk of his gold on this horse race. What's the next misstep? What happens?
Well, after the horse race debacle, he tries to recover his losses by going into business. And it seems like a good idea at the time. He partners with a friend, the son of a wealthy merchant, to open a shop. They decide to pool their resources to buy inventory.
Makes sense. Partnership can be a good way to share the risk.
Exactly. The plan is for Nomasir to invest his remaining gold up front, and then the friend, who's supposed to be well off, will contribute his share later.
Okay, so what goes wrong? Does the friend not come through with the money?
That's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
The friend, despite coming from a wealthy background, turns out to be completely irresponsible. He doesn't contribute his share, and he also makes some really bad purchasing decisions.
So basically, Nomasir is stuck holding the bag.
Pretty much. And as you can imagine, things spiral downward from there. Nomasir ends up carrying the entire financial burden of the business. Sales are poor, they can't keep up with expenses, and eventually the business collapses.
So it's back to square one, essentially.
Worse, actually. He has to sell off the remaining inventory at a loss, just to try and recoup some of his money. He's left with practically nothing.
It's incredible how quickly things can unravel.
It is. It really emphasizes that even when the intentions are good, even if you have a seemingly sound business idea, things can fall apart if you don't manage things well, if you don't have sound judgment.
So what does this second failure teach Nomasir?
It really drives home the importance of choosing your business partners extremely carefully. It's not enough to just trust someone because they seem like a good person. You need to make sure you have a solid agreement, you need to assess their competence, and you need to be protected if things don't go as planned.
Makes sense. So after these two pretty major financial blows, Nomasir is, to put it mildly, in a tough spot. He has to sell off his possessions just to get by. It's a huge contrast to where he started, full of hope and with a bag of gold.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly wealth can disappear if you don't have those guiding principles to manage it. He started with an advantage, that initial bag of gold, but without the knowledge of how to use it wisely, it vanished.
Makes you think.
It does. How many times do we see similar situations play out today? People get a windfall, maybe an inheritance or a lottery win, but without that understanding of basic financial principles, they end up right back where they started, or even worse off in a very short amount of time.
Right. It's not just about having the money. It's about knowing what to do with it. So here's Nomasir. He's at his lowest point, having lost pretty much everything. And it's at this moment that he remembers something important. The clay tablet his father gave him.
That's the turning point. The gold is gone, but the knowledge, that potential for future wealth, still there. It's like a light bulb goes off in his head. He realizes that the wisdom he ignored at the beginning, that might have been the most valuable gift after all.
The real treasure was the knowledge all along.
Exactly. And the experience of losing everything, it forces him to confront the value of his father's advice. He directly connects his current situation, his poverty, to not following those principles.
So it's like he finally understands that true wealth isn't just about possessing gold. It's about knowing the rules, understanding the principles that lead to lasting financial security.
Right. It's about mastering the game. And that's when Nomasir shares the 5 laws of gold with his family and, of course, with Calibob's listeners. These laws are the core of this ancient wisdom, and they're just as relevant today as they were back then.
Let's dive into them. So what's the first law?
The first law is all about saving. It says that gold cometh gladly, an increasing quantity to any man who will put by not less than 1/10 of his earnings to create an estate for his future and that of his family. Basically, it emphasizes consistent saving, putting aside at least 10% of everything you earn, no matter how much or how little you make. It's about building that habit of accumulating wealth.
10%, huh? That's specific.
It is. And, the amount itself isn't the most important thing. The real takeaway is the idea of paying yourself first. Before you spend anything, before you pay your bills, you set aside that portion for your future.
Makes sense. It shifts the focus from spending to building.
Right. And there's this interesting phrase in the first law. It says that gold cometh gladly to those who save.
So it's not just about accumulating wealth, it's about attracting it.
Exactly. And Calabob later expands on this, explaining that the gold you save can be put to work to earn more gold. And then the earnings from that gold can be used to generate even more wealth.
So it's like this multiplying effect, right? The idea of compounding, even though they didn't use that term back then.
Precisely. Compounding is a powerful force, and even small, regular savings can grow significantly over time because of it. Think about how much wealth you could build if you consistently saved, even a small amount, and allowed it to compound over decades.
Okay, so the first law is about consistently saving at least 10% of what you earn. What's the second law about?
The second law builds on that foundation of saving and focuses on putting that saved gold to work. It states that gold laboreth diligently and contentedly for the wise owner who finds for it profitable employment, multiplying even as the flocks of the field.
So it's not enough to just save the gold, you have to make it work for you.
Right. It's about active investment, putting your saved capital into ventures that have the potential to generate a return. It's taking that step from just hoarding wealth to actively growing it.
Okay, so they compare it to flocks of the field.
Yes, that's a great analogy. It paints this picture of your initial investment growing and multiplying over time, just like a flock of sheep would if you care for them properly.
So what kind of profitable employment would someone in ancient Babylon have looked for? What would that have looked like?
Well, back then, it could have involved things like lending money to merchants for trade expeditions, investing in farmland or livestock, or maybe even supporting skilled artisans who needed capital to expand their businesses.
Makes sense. But the principle is still the same today, right?
Absolutely. The core idea is finding productive outlets for your capital that you reasonably expect will generate a return.
So that could be stocks, bonds, real estate, starting a business, whatever makes sense for you.
Exactly.
Okay, so the first law is about saving, the second is about investing. What's the third law of gold?
The third law is all about caution and the importance of seeking expert guidance. It says that, quote, clingeth to the protection of the cautious owner who invests it under the advice of men wise in its handling.
This sounds like a direct response to some of Nomisir's earlier mistake.
Absolutely. It's like Arquette is saying, look, don't just jump into anything that sounds good. Seek out advice from people who actually know what they're doing, people who have a proven track record in handling money.
So it's about protecting your wealth as much as growing it.
Exactly. Risk management is key. Making informed decisions based on knowledge and experience, not just speculation or, what your friends tell you.
So it's about seeking out wise counsel. But how do we find these men wise in its handling today?
That's a great question, and it's more important than ever in today's complex financial world. I'd say it's about looking for people who have a demonstrable track record of success. You want to see evidence that they've helped others achieve their financial goals.
What else? What other signs should we look for?
Look for relevant professional qualifications. Are they certified financial planners, chartered financial analysts, or something similar? It's not a guarantee, but at least shows they've taken the time to get educated and meet certain professional standards.
Makes sense. What else?
And perhaps most importantly, make sure they have a fiduciary duty to act in your best interest. That means they're legally obligated to put your needs ahead of their own.
Okay, so look for a track record, qualifications, and fiduciary duty. What about red flags? What should make us wary?
Definitely be wary of anyone who's offering unsolicited advice, especially if they're pushing a specific product or investment. And anyone who guarantees high returns with no risk, run the other way.
Sounds like good advice.
And never underestimate the power of independent verification. Do your own research, get a second opinion, and don't be afraid to ask tough questions. A healthy dose of skepticism can save you a lot of heartache in the long run.
So the third law is about protecting your wealth and seeking wise counsel. What about the fourth law? What does that cover?
The fourth law builds on that cautionary theme and specifically addresses the risks of investing in things you don't understand. It says that gold slippeth away from the man who invests in businesses or purposes with which he is not familiar, or which are not approved by those skilled in its keep.
This one hits close to home for a lot of people, I bet.
I think so too.
Yeah.
It's basically saying, don't put your money into something just because it sounds exciting or because everyone else is doing it. If you don't understand the investment, if you can't explain it clearly, or if you haven't had it vetted by someone knowledgeable, you're setting yourself up for potential losses.
So basically, stick to what you know.
Or at least make sure you thoroughly understand what you're getting into before you invest. And if it's outside your area of expertise, that's where seeking advice from those skilled in its keep comes in.
Right, like that third law.
Exactly.
Nomasir's failed partnership in the merchant shop is a perfect example of this, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He was enthusiastic about the idea, but he didn't really understand the business, and neither did his partner, as it turned out. Enthusiasm isn't a substitute for experience and knowledge.
Right. So what are some examples of this in today's world? What kind of investments might fall into this category of things you don't understand?
Well, you see this a lot with complex financial products, the kind that are loaded with jargon and hard to decipher. Sometimes they're legitimate, but sometimes they're designed to obscure risks or fees.
What else?
Also, be wary of investments that are heavily hyped but lack transparency. If you can't easily figure out where your money is going and how it's supposed to generate returns, that's a major red flag.
So basically, do your homework.
Exactly. Don't let FOMO, that fear of missing out, push you into something risky. Take the time to research and understand any investment before you commit your money.
And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
You got it.
Okay, so we've covered saving, investing, seeking wise counsel, and understanding your investments. What's the fifth and final law of gold?
The fifth law tackles the temptation of unrealistic returns and the dangers of emotional decision-making. It states that gold flees the man who would force it to impossible earnings, or who followed with the alluring advice of tricksters and schemers, or who trusts it to his own inexperience and romantic desires in investment.
There's a lot packed into that one.
There is. It's basically a warning against chasing those get-rich-quick schemes, against listening to smooth talkers who promise unrealistic returns, and against letting emotions like greed or wishful thinking cloud your judgment. The key phrase here is impossible earnings.
It's a reminder to be realistic about financial expectations.
Exactly. There's no magic formula, no secret shortcut to wealth. If something sounds too good to be true, it almost always is. Remember Nomasir and that horse race? That's a prime example of how quickly wealth can disappear when you chase illusions.
Right. So who are these tricksters and schemers today?
Well, they come in many forms. They're the classic Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes, often disguised as legitimate businesses. But there are also online scams, fake investment opportunities, and even overly aggressive salespeople who push products that are unsuitable for their clients, all to line their own pockets.
So how can we protect ourselves?
First, be wary of any investment that promises unusually high returns with little or no risk. That's a huge red flag. Do your research, check with independent sources, and don't be afraid to walk away if something feels off.
Good advice. So let's recap for a second. The 5 laws of gold are: pay yourself first by saving at least 10% of your earnings. Put your gold to work by investing it wisely. Seek advice from those who are knowledgeable about handling money. Avoid investments you don't understand. And be wary of get-rich-quick schemes and unrealistic promises.
You got it. That's a great summary.
So after sharing these 5 laws, Nomasir describes how he applied them to rebuild his life, right?
He does. The first thing he does is get a job and immediately start saving a portion of his income. He puts that first law into practice right away.
Good for him.
And then, crucially, he starts looking for opportunities to invest wisely. He remembers those second and third laws, putting his money to work and seeking expert advice. And he gets involved in this venture that's raising capital to build new metal gates for the city.
Sounds like a solid practical investment.
It was. And what's interesting is that he partners with the slave master, who has a lot of experience in managing large projects, and he also works with a group of other investors.
So he's not just going it alone this time.
No. He's learned from his mistakes. He's collaborating, pooling resources and knowledge, and relying on the expertise of others, and it pays off. The venture is a success, the gates are built, and Nomasir shares in the profits.
That's a great example of those laws in action, isn't it? Saving diligently, investing wisely, and seeking expert advice.
Absolutely. And he specifically mentions that the success of this venture was because of the collective wisdom of the group. They carefully considered the risks, weighed their options, and made informed decisions together. It's a stark contrast to those impulsive decisions he made earlier.
Right, like that horse race.
Exactly.
Okay, so fast forward 10 years. Nomasir has rebuilt his wealth, and he returns to his father, Arkad. How does that reunion go?
Well, he approaches his father in a really interesting way. First, he returns the original bag of gold that Arkad had given him.
Showing that he hadn't completely squandered it.
Right. It's a sign of respect, acknowledging his starting point. But then, and this is the really powerful part, he presents his father with 2 bags of gold.
2 bags.
Yes, 2 bags of gold, but, and here's the key, in place of the clay tablet with the 5 laws.
Wow. That's symbolic.
It's incredibly symbolic.
Yeah.
He's essentially saying that the understanding of those laws, the wisdom his father imparted, was far more valuable than the initial gold itself. It was that knowledge that enabled him to recover his losses and build even greater wealth.
It's like saying, thanks for the loan, Dad, but the real gift was the knowledge.
Exactly. And his actions speak volumes. He's internalized those lessons, and he understands that true wealth is built on a foundation of knowledge and discipline.
And what's Arcad's reaction?
You can tell he's proud. He sees that his son hasn't just regained wealth, he's developed the character and wisdom to maintain it, to grow it. That's true success, isn't it?
Definitely.
Passing on not just wealth, but also the wisdom to use it wisely.
So the story of Nomasir is really a lesson for all of us.
It is. And that's what Calabab emphasizes as he wraps up his tale. He turns to his listeners and asks them some really pointed questions. He wants them to reflect on their own financial habits, their own level of accountability.
He's challenging them.
Absolutely. He's saying, look, why is it that some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others struggle? Is it just luck, or is there something more to it? And he makes it clear that he believes financial success isn't about chance. It's about understanding and applying these 5 fundamental laws.
It's about taking control.
Exactly. And he shares his own story, explaining that his wealth didn't come from some lucky break or a sudden windfall. It was the result of applying these principles consistently from a young age.
The power of consistency.
Exactly. And he says something really insightful. He observes that wealth that comes quickly goeth the same way. It's a reminder that true financial security is built gradually, through consistent effort and informed decisions, not through chasing quick riches.
So slow and steady wins the race.
You could say that.
Then Calabab goes back and revisits each of the 5 laws, kind of emphasizing their importance based on his own experiences. It's like he's providing a personal endorsement, saying, look, this stuff works. I've seen it in my own life.
That's a great way to put it. He's not just talking theory, he's speaking from experience.
So what does he say about each law?
Well, for the first law, he emphasizes how saving, even small amounts consistently, leads to greater and greater accumulation over time. He talks about the snowball effect, how those small regular contributions build momentum and grow into something much bigger.
The power of compounding.
Exactly. For the second law, he highlights how wisely invested gold has this innate ability to multiply. He compares it to seeds that are planted and grow, producing a harvest that's many times greater than the initial investment.
So your wealth has the potential to grow exponentially if you manage it right.
That's the idea. And then for the third law, he stresses the importance of seeking out wise counsel, especially when it comes to protecting your assets. He talks about how even the most diligent savers and investors can be vulnerable to scams or bad advice if they don't have someone knowledgeable to guide them.
So it's like having a financial guardian angel.
Exactly. Someone who can help you navigate those complex financial waters and avoid costly mistakes.
Okay, what about the 4th law? What does he say about that one?
He doubles down on the importance of understanding what you're investing in. He warns against being lured by fancy promises or getting caught up in the hype without really knowing how an investment works.
So no blind faith.
Right. He encourages his listeners to be curious, to ask questions, and to not be afraid to walk away if something doesn't make sense or feels too risky.
And the 5th law?
For that one, he really hammers home the dangers of unrealistic expectations and the need to keep emotions in check when making financial decisions. He talks about how greed and fear can cloud your judgment and lead to poor choices.
So basically, don't let your emotions drive your investments.
Exactly. Think things through, assess the risks rationally, and don't get swept up in the excitement or fear of the moment.
Makes sense. So Calabab concludes his talk with a really powerful image. He contrasts those who worry every day about just surviving, those who are constantly scrambling just to make ends meet, with those who follow the laws of gold and build a secure future for themselves and their families. And he talks about entering Babylon, the city of wealth and prosperity, and the distribution of earned gold.
He's painting this picture of abundance and the rewards that come from following these principles.
And then he poses this final, thought-provoking question to his listeners. He asks them, what will you be able to say about your gold 10 years from now?
That's a powerful question, isn't it? It really makes you think about the long-term consequences of your choices today. Are you building a solid foundation for your financial future, or are you letting opportunities slip away?
He's highlighting the lasting impact of our decisions, the fact that both wise and unwise choices have consequences that can ripple out over time. And he ends by saying that the treasures of Babylon, those rewards of wealth and prosperity, they're not reserved for a select few. They're available to anyone who's willing to act with purpose and apply the 5 laws of gold, guided by their own desires and aspirations.
It's a message of empowerment. He's saying that you have the power to shape your own financial destiny, that you don't have to be a victim of circumstance. You can take control, make informed decisions, and build the future you want.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the 5 laws of gold, the message is clear. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a timeless framework for building lasting wealth and achieving true financial well-being. It's about consistently saving, investing wisely, seeking expert advice when needed, understanding what you're investing in, and being realistic about expectations. It's a long game, not a short sprint.
And it's a journey that's within everyone's reach. These principles are accessible, they're actionable, and they've stood the test of time. It's about cultivating that mindset of financial prudence, making informed decisions, and embracing the power of consistency.
So with that in mind, here's something to consider as you go about your day. Of those 5 laws, which one resonates most strongly with you right now? What's one specific, actionable step you could take today, however small, that aligns with this ancient wisdom and could put you on a path toward greater financial security and prosperity? Don't underestimate the power of even small changes made consistently over time.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the wisdom of Babylon. We hope these principles provide valuable insights for your own financial journey.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the ideas that matter.